We are in part three of three, the last one on the treasure parables from the book of Luke. And so quick review, we've been in the book of Luke, there are three parables that have to do with money. And so yes, this is the third and final one on money and treasure. The first one we looked at 2 weeks ago, Luke 16, 1-9. We looked at this wonderful parable of the dishonest manager. And basically the big takeaway from that parable was that Jesus is challenging us to be shrewd about investing our wealth in Jesus' kingdom and in eternity, okay? By taking care of the poor and the hurting and the needy and all of that. And then last week we looked at the rich man and Laz. I like that better than Lazarus. So the rich man and Laz in the same chapter, Luke 16, 19-31. And in that we saw Jesus was teaching us that just believing in Jesus, okay? There's this wonderful truth that you can't earn your salvation, that we put our faith in him and he saves us. But the kind of believing in Jesus that Jesus wants is the kind of believing in him that leads us, okay? That leads us to taking care of the poor and the needy and the hurting, okay? And so today we're going to look at another famous parable, the third parable in the book of Luke that has to do with money, the third of these treasure parables, and that's kind of a scary one, okay? And it's the rich man and his barns. So let's read this together, the rich man and his barns. And he told him this parable, Jesus, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops, okay? So all the farmers liked the first part of this parable, right? Wow, to have a year like that. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, okay? And now so far, this, nothing looks wrong in this, does it? We know how this parable ends. If you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you've probably heard this parable or come across this parable. And so you kind of know how this ends. So you're maybe set up to think this is really bad. But let's just stop and think about for a moment. Is this really bad? I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Isn't this what we do? When your business is successful, when your investments are successful, don't you invest more? Don't you grow it? Doesn't sound very bad to me. Now, and he wants to save up. Why? Because he wants to take life easy. That sounds a lot like retirement to me. So, are we all wicked and evil who desire someday to have savings enough to retire? Well, we could just stop right here and I could lay a big guilt trip on you and say, give it all to the church, and wouldn't that be wonderful for my coffers? So what's wrong with this? Well, anyway, let's keep reading. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Now again, this passage, as with so many passages in Scripture, has been used by Christians in all kinds of strange ways, okay? And of course, it does seem scary. And so Christians have taken from this all kinds of things, that it is bad to be, have profit of any kind, to save for retirement, to retire. All kinds of things have come out of this passage. It's automatically bad to be successful in business. It's automatically bad to be wealthy. Okay, there have been Christians throughout history that have taken passages like this very, very literally. And so the question is, are we meant to take this parable absolutely literally, that yes, it is bad to save money, it's bad to retire, it's bad to be successful? And the answer is no. And again, something that we come back to regularly here at Crossview is that the Bible is, for the most part, not a black and white book of all kinds of rules. This is exactly how you must live every single situation. It's a book of wisdom that we're meant to wrestle with. And to prove to you that this is a book that is meant to be wrestled with and that this is a wisdom thing, not something that's supposed to be taken absolutely literally all the time, let's go look at some other passages in Scripture. For example, Proverbs 21. Most of the book of Proverbs would seem to contradict the parable of the rich man and his barns. For example, it says this in Proverbs 21, the plans of the diligent lead to profit. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. According to the book of Proverbs, Actually, it's a good thing when people are wise, when they work hard, and as a result, end up profiting. In fact, in the book of Proverbs, it's that sometimes, it's not that all people who are poor are foolish, but foolishness can lead to poverty. And we could go through verse after verse after verse. Proverbs 21, same chapter. The wise store up. So the rich man in the parable stores up. He's storing up in his barns. He builds bigger barns. And he gets in trouble in that parable. And some Christians go, well, then we shouldn't store up. We shouldn't. But look at right here, Proverbs 21. The wise people save. Wise people store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. I won't ask for a show of hands. Who would fall under that there? But that's Proverbs. So again, what we have here is that something we have to remember over and over and over again. For the most part, the Bible does not give us, I mean, yes, there are some things. Do not murder. The greatest commandment is to love. There are things that are black and white, okay, that are true. But for the most part, the Bible gives us things we're meant to wrestle with. It's a book of wisdom. So clearly, there is a time to profit. There's a time to save. There's a time to build bigger. But clearly, as we see in that parable, and we're going to go back and wrestle with the parable, there's also a way not to save. There's a way not to store up. There's a way not to succeed, okay? So poverty, so I just want to make sure that we're getting this here, because this is where sometimes in church history, Christians have gone wrong. They take a parable like that, and we could share all kinds of examples of Christians who throughout church history, took vows of poverty, gave everything away. And by the way, even that's not bad. Some of those people were doing the will of God, okay? But we have a tendency in Christian history to idolize those people who just gave absolutely everything away because we think that must be the most spiritual. But the fact of the matter is that poverty is not in itself a virtue. That's what we find in Proverbs. Poverty is not a virtue, and wealth is not a sin, okay? You can be poor and ungodly, and you can be rich and godly. And vice versa. You can be rich and ungodly. You can be poor and godly. Poverty and wealth are not the issues. Those things are in and of themselves morally neutral, very important. So we don't idolize those who take vows of poverty. In some cases, no doubt God has called them to do that. And some in history of taking vows of poverty have done amazing work. But it's not the calling for all of us, and the Bible doesn't tell us that's what we're all meant to do. One more in Proverbs, and then we'll go back to the parable of the rich man and his barns. Notice what Proverbs 3 says, honor the Lord with your wealth. Notice it does not say wealth is wrong. Honor the Lord by getting rid of your wealth. It says honor the Lord with your wealth. So there is a way to be godly. So as we go back to that rich man and his barns parable, we have to remember that there is a way, okay? So it's not that he's rich, automatically he's bad. It's not that building barns bigger and storing up is automatically, that's what makes him bad. There is a place for being wealthy for God. So what then is Jesus so upset with? And we could say it this way. Being wealthy is not morally wrong. It's how you become wealthy and what you do with your wealth that determines judgment or reward in the end. So now let's go back to the parable itself. Jesus' purpose in teaching this parable, what is he trying to get across to us? And if we go back to the verse that introduces the parable, we find this, verse 15. Then Jesus said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And the key word here is greed. Jesus is not upset in this parable at the rich man because he's rich. What he's coming against is greed, okay? So what is greed? And there's different definitions we could look at of greed, but the one I want to use today is this one. One way to define greed. When you're, and I use this word, I cycled through a bunch of things. When your priority, when your I was trying to find, but this is the definition I came up with. When your overriding priority in life becomes accumulating and or enjoying your wealth. There is a way of being wealthy, and no doubt some of you know, I know wealthy people where their wealth is like almost an afterthought. Have you ever known people like that? Where their wealth is almost just an afterthought. It's just, they're very good at what they do, they're successful in however it is that they're successful, but they don't live for it at all. They hardly, think about it. They're generous, they share. There is a way to be wealthy where it's not even a priority, it's just part of, you've just been successful. You're Proverbs, you're wise, you're diligent, you're hardworking, you're good at what you do, and you end up being wealthy. But then there's a way of being wealthy or becoming wealthy where the overriding priority in your life. So what I mean is this. How do you know that your overriding priority is wealth? Is when you are willing to compromise, right and wrong in order to become wealthy. That would mean you have an overriding priority of wealth. That would be greed. You're willing to compromise your integrity. You're willing to sacrifice your family in order to get more wealth. That would be an overriding priority. When your overriding priority, when you're willing to walk over people, abuse people, take advantage of people in order to get wealthy or to enjoy your wealth, that's where you're not just now getting wealth in the way of Proverbs, you're becoming greedy. So here are some potential, I always like to think through, potential warning signs of greed, because wouldn't it be nice if the Bible just gave us exact numbers? If you make $45,000 a year or less, you're not greedy. And if you make between $45,000 and $80,000 a year, you might be greedy. Watch out. And if you make more than $80,000 a year, you are definitely greedy. Like that would just be easier, wouldn't it? We could just all categorize each other and make our choices, but it's not that easy because the fact of the matter is poor people can be greedy just like rich people can be greedy. So what are some potential warning signs that we might be wrestling with greed? So potential warning signs of greed. So here's one. You would rather protect your stuff than share your stuff. Have you ever been around people, and I'm sure you have. We've all been around people that love to share their stuff. Isn't this true? And aren't they like the most wonderful people? There's people who are just like, please use it, and they actually mean it. Like there's people who, they usually don't say please, they just say, yeah, you can use my stuff anytime. And then they give you the wrong phone number, and you can never get a hold of them, right? But there's people where it's genuine, right? Like it's like, no, please, no, please. It's like, okay, leave me alone. I don't want to use it. Go away, right? But they want you to use their stuff. They have stuff, okay? They might have some wealth. They have stuff. They have a cabin, or they have that nice tool you really want that you envy and covet or whatever. They have a nice vehicle, whatever it is. They have stuff, but they don't like. It's not their overriding priority. They just wish people would use this stuff. And then there's other people, they have the nicest stuff, the nicest house, the nicest tools, but nobody would ever get to use it or look at it or touch it. They have the nicest house on the inside, but just nobody ever sees it, right? Because you don't want anyone to wreck it. And according to this parable, Jesus says, you don't get to take any of your stuff with you. You don't get to take any of your stuff with you. So if you've put all of your eggs in the basket of, I just love my stuff, Jesus says that's foolish. Here's another sign that you might be greedy. These are potential, by the way. Okay? Potential. Makes you feel a little more comfortable. Gives you kind of a way out. You spend yourself into debt, but you don't have money to save or give. You say, wait a minute, I would have thought greedy people were people who don't have any debt because they have lots of money. Actually, sometimes the most greedy people are the people who are the most in debt. Isn't that true? Because they're never actually content. I would think, this is I think a problem in our world in general. It's part of it's part of what is happening to our environment and the economy and all kinds of stuff is you have just this constant need for more. You spend yourself into debt, but you don't have money to save or give. There's people who they have to have the nice, they have to have, and again, I'm not picking on anyone here. You might have driven up here today in a brand new $80,000 truck, and I'm sure if you're here at a service at Crossview, you're not greedy. It's other people at other churches that have this problem, right? But you have those people where they have to have the $80,000 truck, and they have to have the this and the newest of that and the nicest, and they're always dressed so nice and blah, 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 blah. And they have debt up to here. They can barely handle it. They can hardly make their payments. They're worried about their bills every single month. They have nothing to save or give. They constantly spend. It might be a sign of greed. That's why the antidote to this kind of greed is contentment. If you can't afford the $80,000 truck, just be content with the 2010 Dodge you drive. Is it 2010, Freddie? Oh, 2002. See, he's content. He's not greedy at all. I know him. I'm buddies with him. He's not greedy. He has other issues, but not greed. 2002 Dodge. Like, we should get him up here and just say, here it is. This is the opposite of the rich man. Yeah, well, you haven't beat. What do you have, Rick? Okay, yeah, so you've probably gone into what is miser is the opposite of. Just kidding. One way to fight greed. Let me just give you an interesting thought about fighting greed. Make a budget that includes significant saving and giving, then stick to it. And you know what the sticking to it part is? There's a biblical term for sticking to your budget. It's called being content. You don't have money to do it? Then don't do it. You don't have money to buy that thing? You don't have money to go on that trip? Then don't. And find happiness without having everything you want to buy is actually good for your soul, good for the community, good for the earth, okay? Good for the world, okay? One of the most practical weapons against greed, make a budget that includes saving and giving, then stick with it. As I said before, you can't take your stuff with you. Look at what God says. This is what Jesus is obviously speaking here through the parable, through God here. You can't take your stuff with you. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? You don't get to take it all with you. By the way, it's not a sin to enjoy and be thankful for what you have. Again, we don't need to swing to this other side where we take this parable so literally that anything I own is bad. Any kind of wealth is bad. That's not the problem. The problem is when I think my life becomes an overriding priority. I'm willing to lose relationships. I'm willing to not be generous. I'm willing to whatever, because I just love my stuff. I personally, do you want to leave behind an absolutely pristine house? Is that really the goal? Or do you want to leave behind a house with tons of memories that you had people over, you had, some of your kids' sketchy friends were sometimes over, and they drove you crazy, but at least your kids had their friends over, right? And yes, they wrecked some stuff. They dented the garage door. Why did you have to play hockey in front of the garage door? But it's actually just a garage door. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? That pristine garage door. You're going to take it with you to your funeral. And this brings up a third potential warning. I'm not saying this is a comprehensive list, but this is just three. I just wanted to give you three. As your wealth increases, the percentage you give does not increase. And by the way, notice when I'm talking about giving here, I'm not just talking about here. A lot of times at churches when they're talking about giving, the assumption all the time is you're always giving everything. I'm talking about just giving in general. I'm just talking about generosity, okay? But as your wealth increases, the percentage you give does not also increase, okay? So a person who lives paycheck to paycheck does not have as much margin. Where does giving and generosity come from? It comes out of the margins. A person whose whole paycheck is taken up paying the rent, paying the bills, and there's a lot more people in this community who are like this than many of us realize or want to realize. Not to mention people around the world living in, all kinds of different levels of really terrible poverty. Someone who's just barely making it by has less to give. And someone might say, well, everybody just give a percentage of what you make. It's harder for the person who's living paycheck to paycheck to give 10% than it is for someone who makes $1 million. It's way easier. There's lots more here to give for that percentage. Does that make sense? I've actually known people in my life, now based on this, I want to just take a quick rabbit trail here. Because this is why I think it's important that as we, the more wealth we have, the more we grow in that generosity. But I want to just touch on something else again, because I've actually known people in my life, and I wanted to come back and hit this in this sermon again. I've actually known people in my life who basically thought, they might not have come out and said it, but they basically thought, if you own anything nice, that's borderline sinful. Like to own a cabin, you could give all that money away to missions or whatever. To own a boat, that could be given to XXX missions that needs it. So basically, to own anything is a sin. And I don't agree with that for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons is, where do you draw the line on wealthy? And it's very easy for us as Christians, because again, I want to make sure I'm hitting this from both sides. Because on the one hand, we can talk like this, and everybody goes, we're all thinking of someone wealthier than us. It's like, oh yeah, this one doesn't apply to me. This word wealth doesn't apply to me. 90 whatever percent of the world would look at most of us in here and apply this word to us. But then we sit here and we go, that's someone else. That's not me. That doesn't apply to me. The word wealth doesn't apply to me, right? And then sometimes we judge people, right? Because it's like, well, they own a cab. Oh, they have like 3 vehicles. Oh, and one of them's really nice. Like, clearly they're not living for the Lord. If they were spiritual, they wouldn't own such a nice car because they would be giving away more. My problem with that kind of thinking is, where do you draw the line at what is wealthy? Because when you judge someone for buying a $4 million house, for example, you think they could be more spiritual and spend it on something else. There are people in Ethiopia who could judge you for buying a $400,000 house. And by the way, most houses in this area right now are like $400,000 if you've tried to buy anything, right? And you might judge someone for driving a $150,000 sports car, but there's people in the inner city of Winnipeg and even here, right here in Steinbach, who would judge you for, driving a $50,000 minivan. And right away I see people stop making eye contact. Why did he have to say 50? Honey, why didn't he say 70? So there's always someone poorer than us who can judge us for wealth. So the point is, again, there's nothing wrong with owning stuff. It's not the owning of stuff that is so bad. It is, do we have an overwhelming priority to accumulate, or do we have stuff to share it? Do we spend, a person who has, someone who makes, let's say, has $100 million. Is there anything wrong with a person like that being able to afford a $5 million house? I really don't think so. But if you own a $5 million house, have you also challenged yourself to give $10 million? That would be the bigger question, is have you also challenged yourself to give at a higher level? Does that make sense? Maybe not. Nobody nodded. We'll just move on. We better just leave that point behind. Let's talk about a few more thoughts about giving. People have out of this parable. Thoughts about giving. First of all, with this rich man and his barns, there can sometimes be almost this like, when we went through the rich man and Lazarus parable, and that can be like, wow, we should just, oh my goodness, if I see any poor person, I'm obligated immediately to give everything I have in my wallet away. And the PIN number in the back, the CVC number of my credit card, right? Some thoughts about giving. It's actually good to be planned and smart about your giving. Okay? There's nothing in the Bible that says, remember the dishonest manager. If we go back, if we just keep all of these parables in tension, the dishonest manager, Jesus says we should be like the dishonest manager. Why? We should be shrewd about investing in Jesus' kingdom. In other words, it's actually a good thing to be planned and smart about our giving. That when you think of giving, it's not just flushing money down the toilet. I just have to get rid of money because it's bad to have it. And if you continue to have that thought after this message, you can give it to me, okay? But we can be planned and smart about our giving. That's really important. There's also a difference between being generous and being enabling. Right? That person in your family who keeps asking you for money, and now you've heard the rich man and his barns parable, you've heard the rich man and Lazarus parable, and you feel like, well, I guess Jesus is saying I need to give him $1,000 again. Well, maybe he is. Maybe they genuinely need it. Or maybe they need to visit the school of hard knocks. And they need to learn some lessons. And they actually need to learn to budget. And by you continuing to be generous, you're not actually being generous. You're actually enabling them. You know, one of the things when I was on the West Coast going to school there in Vancouver, I would volunteer every Friday night at this street mission in downtown Vancouver, which led to all kinds of interesting stories and experiences and meeting people. And when I first started volunteering there, I didn't have much money because I was there mostly on student loans anyway. So any money I gave away was really the government's. But I was very generous with the money that I owed. And but I'd often, when I'd go downtown, I would just see people who needed money and were asking for money, and I would just give out cash. Okay, it wasn't a lot. This sounds like, wow, this guy was just handing out cash. It was like $5 bills, right? And I could give away 4 on a given night, and I was like, whoo, right? But I would just give out cash. And I remember one of the workers with this mission that I was working with taking me aside and saying, okay, so just so you know, love the heart. Love the heart. Love that you want to be generous. Just so you know, not all that cash is being spent in good ways. And I was like, what? What kind of bad things would you spend it on? Like they can buy an apple, a loaf of bread. Like, well, that's not what always, some might do that, but some might not do that. Oh, okay. And then said to me, like, maybe, food or... So then after that, what I did was a number of times is if someone would ask me for money, I would say, let's go for a burger. And we'd sit and have awkward conversations in Burger King or McDonald's. And it was awesome. I love awkward conversations, but some strange conversations. But the point is, okay, boom. Okay, I'm going to love you. I'm going to learn how. But the point is, one of the big things I then learned out of that, coming out of this one as well, about the difference between being generous and enabling, was the importance of giving to organizations and people that have experience working with hurting people, needy people, not just poor people. There's so many needs in this world that have, not just have to do with money and poverty, but to give to organizations that know how to do these things. One of the organizations I'm so happy that we get to partner with is right here in this building. They're upstairs. And that is Steinbach Community Outreach. And so we were able this last year through our missions giving to give them $20,000. I wish we could give more. In the future, as we get more giving here, we would like to give more to them. They do amazing work with people right here in Steinbach who are homeless, struggling, but not just homeless, people who struggle with grocery money, with rent money. They actually do incredible work. And until you see it, you know what the thing is about poverty here in Steinbach? That's so different than Bible times. Jesus tells a story, his story in Luke 16, he tells the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and you have this poor person right at the gate, and he's got sores, and he needs help. And the rich man ignores it. You know what's so different for us today is that poverty isn't in our face here in Steinbach. You can actually pretend, we can easily fool ourselves and live our lives here in Steinbach and go to work every day and pretend like there isn't poverty in our community because we just don't see it. The poor person with the sores doesn't lie right at the front of your house, so you open the door and you're, oh, poor guy. That doesn't happen in our society. So then we go, oh, there's not poor people here. There's actually lots of poverty here. There's lots of people who have lots of needs. It's just harder to see, and it's harder to connect with. It's not so easy as in the rich man and Lazarus to just go out your front door and find someone to give to. But there's organizations like Steinbach Community Outreach. They do incredible, and there's others that we've partnered with here in town as well. They actually know what they're doing, deeply connected in the community. And I've had, just by physically being here on site, my office is over here, I have the windows there, and I get to see the work that's being done. It's really amazing. Those kinds of organizations are all over the place, and it's just up to us to find them and be generous and connect with them, and God can do a work through that. So, some final challenges to consider doing to end this sermon and to end this part on the treasure parables. Consider doing something this week or this month. Number one, if you are far in debt and unable to save or give, go see a financial advisor. That's straight from Jesus. Okay? Not quite, but basically. There's people out there that can help you get out of debt, help you get out of that greed, stress cycle. It'll change your life. And by the way, remember what Jesus said as well. Actually, let's just go there right now. Then we'll come back to this. Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Someday, we're all going to have to stand before God and give an account. How did you live your life? Did you actually care about people in the community you lived in and the people around you? Did you actually care? You give an account. And then you get there and you say, "Oh, I just kind of, stressed. Spread my money everywhere, wasted it everywhere." No. You can stop that cycle. Go and see a financial advisor. Become a person of Proverbs who can then give. Number two, is it time for you, again, these are all just questions. There's no law, by the way. But is it time for you to start the habit or budget of monthly giving 5 to 10% of your income? And again, we've talked about that number a number of times in this series. It's not a law. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to do that, because the Bible would never want to limit those people who are able to give more than that to that. But is it time to make a habit and a budget of monthly giving? Number three, if you already give 10% and have the means to give more, is it time to intentionally grow your giving? Some thoughts to think, and then again to end with Jesus. Then he said to them, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." I wonder what would happen if we as Christians truly got that heart. What would happen if we genuinely went out through the church, but also through the different organizations and ministries that operate in the community, and we actually said, we're going to be intentional about our giving, we're going to be intentional about growing our giving, and we're going to be intentional about budgeting and being generous in the community? What kind of a difference it would make? I think it would make a huge difference. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Jesus, for these parables that speak to us about money. It's not about guilt, Jesus, it's about perspective. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. The world needs to see a community of people that know how to find joy in relationships and loving others, where stuff is just an excuse to bless people. Help us to become those kinds of people. In your name we pray, amen.